Sports Talk Chicago. Here Jon Zaghloul, and we are back and ready for today's special guest. He's the senior producer of NFL Films and an analyst for NFL Matchup on ESPN. Please welcome Greg Cosell to the program. Greg, it's great to have you on. How are you?
John, I'm doing great. How are you?
Good. Thanks for being here. How's life after the football season for you?
Well, it really doesn't slow down for me, John, because I have to go right into watching college players, evaluate them for the draft. And unfortunately, I'm just one person, so it takes a lot of time. So it doesn't really feel like anything slowed down for me.
What's your typical schedule during the season? Like, how much time and effort do you put in
Ah,
per day basis?
well, it's funny you ask that because when people find out what I do, they'd say, "Boy, I would love your job." And then I tell them I work about 75 hours a week, and they say, "I'm not sure I really want that job." So, because you just have to keep watching tape. That's basically what I do. Obviously, I'm on air on the NFL Matchup Show, which I've been now for 5 years. Prior to that, I was the producer. So I'm still involved in formatting the show and in sort of the concepts that are spoken about. Although Matt Bowen, who's a Chicago guy, he's on the show with me, along with Sal Pal. And I certainly don't tell Matt what he's going to do, but I try to figure out how the show should look, format it, along with a colleague here at NFL Films named Todd Schmidt, who does a great job. But mostly it's just watching tape. And, I feel like that if you don't watch it in detail and you don't watch as much as you can, then you're going to miss something important. So I'm sure in that regard, I'm probably much like a coach. There's always more to see. There's always more to learn. And I try to take that approach. So it's a never-ending battle, John. Quite honestly, it's just you just have to keep watching the tape. Something always pops up that you say, "Wow, that's really interesting," and you just learn more and more.
You ever get burnt out? Is it ever too much?
Well, burnt out's probably not the right word. I think there are times I'd love to say, "Hey, can I go home now?" And I can't. But it's just because I've been doing it for so long and so many hours. But no, I mean, burnt out's probably not the right description.
What fascinates you about film study?
Well, it's funny. Years and years ago, I focused much more on individual players. Over the years, I've become much more fascinated by tactics, schemes, concepts. I find that now far more interesting than individual players. In fact, a lot of times I'll get calls and people say to me, "Oh, can you tell me who the best guards in the league are?" And I just have to say, I really can't. I don't really watch the game like that anymore. Are there certain players I make it a point to take note of, depending on who they are? Sure. But I don't necessarily sit and chart, how an offensive line is playing in a given game, because you can't do everything. Like I said, I'm one person, and as it stands now, it takes me probably close to 2 hours just to go through one side of a ball with a game, because that's the way we get our coaching tape is, let's say a team runs 70 offensive plays. You'll see each play first from the all 22 from the sideline, and then you'll see the same play from the end zone look. So if there's 70 plays, not only am I watching the offense, but I'm watching the defense as well. So it takes a good 2 hours just to get through those 70 plays. So therefore, it's impossible to see everything. And I've just become more fascinated over time by the schemes, the tactics, the concepts on both sides of the ball than I am by, noticing an offensive guard's hand placement or his foot movement.
Greg Cosell here on Sports Talk Chicago. Greg, what do you see from Justin Fields during his rookie year?
Probably what I expected, John. I think a quarterback that's highly talented, big arm, can make every throw, incredibly mobile. Quarterbacks who are mobile tend to move because they can, and very often you see with quarterbacks that are mobile that they leave the pocket before they need to, and therefore they leave throws on the field. I think that Justin Fields was not playing behind a great O-line, and that never helps a young quarterback, because what starts to happen, and it's just human nature, is they start to anticipate and perceive pressure that by NFL standards is often not there. So they move when they don't have to. And you don't want to stop him from moving because he has great, what we call second reaction ability, but that can't be the foundation of his game. His game has to be about throwing the ball from the pocket. He obviously needs to learn quite a bit about what defenses are. He's now going to have to learn a new offense. So it's a process. If you speak to coaches, and maybe you have, they will tell you that for a quarterback to truly understand. Now, it doesn't mean you can't play well as you're going through the process, John, but for a quarterback to truly understand, it takes 3 to 4 years, because they have to understand everything about NFL defense. They have to understand everything about their own offense and all the elements and dimensions that go with that. So it takes time. The great quarterbacks, and obviously the Bears hope Fields becomes great, which is not a word I use loosely, by the way, but they drafted him, I believe, 11th and traded up for him. Is that correct?
Correct.
Then they're hoping he becomes great. And he certainly has the traits and skill set to be that. But in order to be great, quarterbacks win 90+% of the time before the ball's even snapped. And that takes time to get to that point.
Okay, so what does that mean, winning 90% of the time before the snap?
That means they have a very clear and defined understanding of what their route concept is, what their protection is, and they have a very clear understanding of what the defense looks like before the ball is snapped, and where the danger points are and what the answer is to those danger points. If you reduce it to very simple terms, John, I'm reducing it to simple terms. The way it's often taught for a quarterback is it middle field open, meaning it's split safety? Is it middle field closed, meaning there's one single post safety? That's the starting point. Then the other thing is, where are the blitz dangers? Where could pressure be coming from that I need to be aware of that the protection can't handle? Or that presents then a weakness in the defense, because if you're bringing extra people, there's fewer in coverage. Football's a numbers game. So I'm simplifying, but that's the starting point. I remember having this conversation years and years ago with Sean Payton, and that's what he said to me. He said, that's the starting point. Middle open, middle closed. Where's pressure potentially coming from? So you have to know all those things. And as I said, there's more detail than that, but that's kind of the foundation. And then you have to know that in relation to what your play call is and what your route concepts are. And then when you know all that, all you're doing when you take the snap then is validating and confirming, because you know already. So you just want to make sure that there's not some big disguise or late movement that totally changes everything. And of course, teams do that at times. Defensive coordinators do get paid too. But for the most part, the great quarterbacks, they win the down before the ball is snapped based on everything we just spoke about.
How do you evaluate Fields' perception then at being able to recognize defenses and winning before the snap?
That he's got a ways to go in that regard, but that's not surprising. That's not surprising at all. You know how this works, John. I mean, you're in the Chicago area, and they're starved. It's a great sports town. It's a football town. They are starved for not only a winning team, but for a quarterback to be really good, because it's been a long time. So what that leads to is that they want this kid to be great yesterday, and it just doesn't happen like that. And particularly from where he came from at Ohio State. And again, no knock on Ohio State's offense. Ryan Day's job is to win college games. That's his job, and he does it pretty damn well. But Justin Fields has a ways to go with all those other elements of the game. And from what I've heard, he's a really good kid. I'm sure he'll get there. It's just a matter of how quickly.
Are you worried about the new offense now, having to learn a second offense in 2 years? Could that hurt his career and hurt his development?
Well, he's starting over. So when you say hurt's probably not the right word, it just changes his development, because he has different things that he has to learn, or he has to learn them in a different way. Because there's not 1,000 pass concepts. So it's just what they're called. And then you have to be able to verbalize that in a huddle. You have to be able, if you're going no huddle, to understand all that in the few words that are that you're asked to know. So it's, I remember having a coach tell me that, if you want to order a hamburger and French fries, it's the same in America as it is in France or Spain, but in France and Spain, you just have to word it differently to place your order. So if you're going to, all the route concepts are the same for the most part, but sometimes they're just worded differently, and you have to then think through all that so you say it correctly, you understand it. If you huddle up, which they will, that you're saying it in a way that the team feels, hey, you're sure of what you're doing, and you're not kind of trying to figure it out yourself. So there's a lot that goes into it to get to the point of taking a snap.
How concerning were his turnover numbers to you? 7 touchdowns, 10 picks, 12 fumbles, I believe. Are those a problem?
I wouldn't say it's a problem after one season, John. I would say that obviously it has to be cleaned up, but I think that's part of the learning process. The one thing, look, interceptions, I've always believed you have to look at each one individually. You can't just look at a number on a page. You have to look at the plays. And I can't remember every single one, obviously, right now, as we're speaking, a couple of months after the season has ended. Fumbles have to be cleaned up. That is a big deal. You cannot fumble the football. Interceptions do happen. I mean, are there quarterbacks that don't throw many, like the really great ones, like the Bradys and the Rodgers? Sure, but they played a long, long time. I think that there's degrees of interceptions, and that's why you have to look at each one individually. You have to see how they come about, when do they come about, what's the game situation. There's many ways to evaluate an interception as opposed to just saying, oh, he threw 10 interceptions in whatever number of starts he had and say that's too many. So that you have to work through.
Wanted to ask you this. There's been a lot of talk about the fumbling problem for Fields, and there's been two schools of thought. Now, one is that it's a bad offensive line, so the offensive line contributed to a lot of the fumbles. The other is it's all on Fields. Where do you stand on that and based on the film?
Well, the offensive line causes the pressure at times, but doesn't cause the fumbles. So it's not the offensive line's fault. Look, if you have a poor offensive line and your quarterback gets sacked a lot, obviously that's an issue that you want to get cleaned up, but the quarterback can't fumble the ball. I mean, it's as simple as that. You have to have some awareness of where pressure is. You have to make sure you have two hands on the ball. You have to have a feel for pressure. And when I say pressure, I'm not necessarily talking about blitz. It can be a 4-man rush, but you have to have a feel for pressure because ultimately, great quarterbacks in this league, they don't drop their eyes and look at the pressure. They feel the pressure. As soon as you drop your eyes, you're done playing quarterback, because then you can't see the routes and the coverage. So ultimately, great quarterbacks feel pressure. They don't look at pressure.
How detrimental were Matt Nagy's play calling when it came to Justin Fields?
I'm going to be honest with you, John. I don't get into that and I'll tell you why. And I'm being honest. I know it's probably a big topic in Chicago. It's a big topic in any city where they think the quarterback, the offense doesn't play well. But I'll tell you why I don't get into it. Because I personally believe, and I've been doing this a long time, and I know a lot of coaches, and I've had a lot of conversations. I think you have to be there all week. You have to be in the meetings. You have to understand what they're trying to get done, how they're trying to get to it. Just because play calls don't work does not automatically mean that the game plan or the specific play call is poor. And see, that's just too easy an answer. No one seemed to rip Matt Nagy in Trubisky's second year when Trubisky had the really good year and it looked like he was on his way to being a solid quarterback. Nobody seemed to rip Matt Nagy then. So you have to be careful about all that stuff. And again, I couldn't tell you whether he's good or bad. First, I don't have enough information to know the answer to that to begin with, and I'm just being honest. So I can't go there.
Do you like at least the Luke Getsy hire? Does he have good reputation based on?
Yeah, I don't know enough about him to know the answer to that. I mean, that's another hard question for me to answer. I mean, who's the quarterback coach? I saw the name. I can't remember. Do you know who it is?
I don't know offhand. I'm sorry about that.
No, I saw the name and it's in the tip of my tongue, and now I can't remember. I think it's someone who's been with Getsy or they have a relationship, but I can't remember who it is.
How big of a jump do you expect Fields to make next year with this new offense? Assuming, if Getsy and him could get along and click well and Fields could start to learn this offense.
I think just based on what's happened in the past with these kinds of things, I would say that it would probably take a little time. Of course, fans are going to want him to be great week one, and that's to be expected. But I would expect it will take a little time. Don't forget, he's going through a whole new learning curve now. And, so now he's played 2 years at Ohio State with an offense that he knew. He played 1 year in the NFL learning an offense, and now he's got to learn a new offense. And that's not so easy. And it's going to take some time.
Greg Cosell still here on Sports Talk Chicago. Greg, let's talk about the draft now. Who's your top quarterback that you've seen so far in these processes?
Well, I've seen the top 6, John, in detail. And I would say that Kenny Pickett would be my number one quarterback. And, the way I would urge people to think about it this way. And again, by saying that Kenny Pickett's my number one, that doesn't mean I'm right or wrong. Reasonable people can watch tape and disagree. So I'm not saying I'm right, and if someone else says someone else, they're wrong. But I think what we're doing, what everybody in the NFL is doing when they look at college players, is they're projecting and transitioning them to the league. So while you may start with traits and attributes, then you have to go beyond that and look at, okay, how does a player fit in the NFL? What are you asking your quarterback to do? What do quarterbacks in the NFL have to be able to do to play at a high level? So Kenny Pickett came from the University of Pittsburgh, where he had Mark Whipple as his offensive coordinator. And Whip had been in the NFL. So when you watch Kenny Pickett, you see the things that NFL quarterbacks have to do. Number one, they did a lot of full field reading progressions, which you rarely see in college football, by the way. So Kenny Pickett understands that conceptually. He understands how to work full field progressions. So he has vision. He has an understanding of how to play in the pocket. At his core, he's an executor and a ball distributor, but he does have mobility. He does have good movement. In fact, sometimes he leaves the pocket too early, and that's something he'll have to work on, but he does have mobility and movement. But he's been taught how to play quarterback in the way that he's going to have to play it in the NFL. So if you look at someone like Matt Corral, who played at Ole Miss, so much of what he did there was based on RPOs and quick game timing and rhythm throws, which do exist in the NFL, but you can't build an offense in the NFL just around that. So if you're going to look at Matt Corral and say, oh, he's a great prospect because he can hit the RPO game, he's going to have to do more than that. And he's going to have to be taught more than that. Now, I don't know Matt Corral. Maybe he can be taught that really well and he'll be great at it. But those are things where teams have to do their due diligence on those kinds of matters to find out. That's why very often completion percentage in college football can be a little misleading. Now, obviously, you don't want a guy completing 52% of his passes, but you can't just look at a guy who completes 69% and say, oh, he's really accurate, because there's a lot of one-read quick game throws. There's a lot of screens. Don't forget, college football, John, is different than the NFL. The hash marks are placed differently, so the wide side of the field is extremely wide. So you can throw screens to the wide side of the field that you and I can complete. So sometimes that can jack up completion percentages on easy throws.
Where's Sam Howell in all this? I know, he was supposed to be pretty good, at least based on last year. What happened to him?
Sam Howell's another guy like Matt Corral. A ton of design run game plays in college, which will not happen in the NFL anywhere near the extent that they did it in college. So Howell's another guy that played in an offense that had a lot of predetermined reads. Now, there are some of that in the NFL. Of course there are. But he's going to have to learn a lot more about the details, the nuances, the subtleties of the position. And again, how long will that take? I can't answer that. That's why teams do interviews. I don't do that. But he struck me as a quarterback that the longer he had to be in the pocket, the more uncomfortable he got. And he's going to have to work through that because he's going to have to play from the pocket in the NFL.
Where's this year's quarterback class ranked compared to last year's?
I would think if you're just talking about special talent, whatever that word means to people, you probably wouldn't say there's that guy in this class, although then you have to define talent. I mean, I don't know what Kenny Pickett's going to exactly be in the NFL. My guess would be that Tom Brady, after his second year in the league back in 2002, was not viewed as a high-level talent the way we look at a Josh Allen or a Patrick Mahomes. So what is talent at the quarterback position? You know, you can make the argument that talent at the quarterback position is the ability to make every kind of throw when it's demanded, to get the ball to the right receiver at the right time with the right throw. You can make an argument that that's what talent is, playing quarterback in the NFL. And if you have second reaction ability, that's great, but that can't be your starting point.
Who's the best quarterback prospect you've ever seen?
Oh, that I've ever seen?
Yes.
Wow. I've been doing this a long time, John. That takes me back. Because I really started watching college players maybe late 90s, early 2000s. I'm trying to think of the players. The best overall. Wow. God, I'm trying to remember drafts. Can you help me out here? I mean, I'm trying to remember drafts. I mean, I remember, like, I thought Carson Palmer, just as a thrower of the football, was super high level. Like, there's not many guys who could throw it like Carson Palmer. And I think that played out basically in his career, probably a notch below a Hall of Fame career. But I'm trying to think of certain, of drafts. God.
I know Andrew Luck was pretty highly rated when he came out. I don't know.
No question. He'd be. Not that I made a mistake on Luck, but I've learned a lot since Andrew Luck came out in the draft about evaluating quarterbacks. So I know a lot of people would say Luck. For people who remember, I did not have Luck at that level, and that's on me. Like I said, I've learned a lot. What you get into is you get into talent, traits versus the nuances of the position. Like Josh Allen is a perfect example. I've made the argument going back a year, even prior to this season, that Josh Allen's the most physically gifted quarterback in the NFL and is arguably one of the most physically gifted quarterbacks I've ever seen. But coming out, people were very concerned, obviously, about his ball placement, the scattershot nature of his throws, which is legitimate, because if you can't throw the ball where you want to, you could be great at everything else, but you basically then have nothing if you can't throw the ball where you want to. So, it depends on how you define talent, what value you ascribe to particular traits. My guess is, John, that if you ask 10 quarterback coaches to list traits, they'd probably all list the same traits. It's just what value do they ascribe to each of those traits? You might get a different answer in that regard.
And Greg, before we finish up today, last question. What's the funniest moment that you've been a part of in your career?
The funniest?
Yes.
Oh my God. That's a hard question. Wow. I don't know if I can answer that. The funniest moment. I mean, there's probably not one moment, but I will say this. Given what the work I do, and, it's collaborative, number one. I mean, obviously watching tape is an individual thing, but it's very collaborative in the fact that we have to talk through things. And when I first started watching coaching tape, and for years and years and years, when Ron Jaworski was on the show, we would sit and watch tape together very often. And that would lead just on a daily basis to a lot of fun, because, you would just talk ball as you're watching. And, obviously, since it was sports, there might have been a curse word here and there, John, and we just had a good time doing it. And so, I can't think of one specific moment, but it was just an awful lot of fun. Now I tend to work more in an isolated fashion because I sit at my desk where I am now at NFL Films, and you can't see it, but I have a screen right here, a TV screen, and I watch tape, and it's much more of an individual endeavor. But that in its own way is fun too, So, but no, I mean, those years with Ron Jaworski, and we would very often, former coaches would come in or former personnel people and watch with us, and I mean, this is not like stand-up comedy like George Carlin, but it was just fun, because it's just talking ball and watching tape.
Well, Greg, thank you so much for joining me. Really appreciate the time. Best wishes, of course, with your studies moving forward, especially with the NFL draft, and looking forward to the next time we chat.
John, I really appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.